This is Physical Science 2, Chapter 12, Part 1 on Earth's internal processes. In this portion of the video lecture, we will be discussing the evolution of the Earth's crust. There were many early ideas as to why the continents were where they were and why they were the shape that they were in. In 1915, meteorologist and climatologist by trade, a guy named Alfred Wegener, proposed the idea of, at one time in Earth's history, there must have been kind of one large supercontinent where all of the continents were connected together. And he called that supercontinent Pangaea. Pan from the Latin word meaning whole or all, and Gaea, of course, referring to Earth. This idea of continental drift, saying that the continents could separate and pull apart, this idea to most geologists at the time seemed rather silly. Alfred Wegener was kind of ousted by the scientific community for his ideas, mainly because he was a guy that worked up in the clouds and in the sky. He was a meteorologist, climatologist, and the geologists couldn't find necessarily any proof that would link this idea of continental drift together. Wegener, however, did a lot of research. One of the most obvious types of lines of evidence that perhaps the continents were at one time all together was this idea that, coastlines seem to match. If you take the east coast of South America, it kind of seems like it would tuck right up into the west coast of Africa. It's almost like they're puzzle pieces. However, this wasn't enough evidence for the scientific community, so Wegener continued and he did a lot of research in Antarctica and found fossils there. Fossils, you think, in a place where there's several meters of ice thick, how and why would those fossils be there? Unless the continent of Antarctica was some other position on the globe at some other point in its history. He found a lot of what we call index fossils of a single species found on several different of the southern continents. The types of fossils that he concentrated on were very common. Glossopteris was a fern type of plant that, as far as we know from fossil evidence, suggests that the seeds would not have been able to blow cross-continent where the continents are in place today. The Lystrosaurus and Cynodnathus, these were very large reptiles that did not swim. They could not have gotten from place to place without having those continents be closer together. Same with Mesosaurus. It was a swimming reptile. However, the span that it had to swim seemed a little bit unlikely. So animals and plants wouldn't have been able to naturally migrate to such separated continents that all of these fossils were discovered in. Another line of evidence to help the geologists was taking samples from mountain ranges, and they seem to almost continue in other continents. For example, the Andes Mountains in South America match rock sequences that are found in the North American Rockies, again suggesting that the North and the South American continent were at one time closer together. We're going to fast forward a few decades here after World War II. World War II, there was a lot of underwater battles with submarines and the like, and it was kind of thought perhaps that maybe this was the wave of the future. We'll be fighting our battles under the water. We didn't know much about the ocean floor, and so after World War II, a Navy man, Harry Hess, he used sonar to accurately map the sea floor. And this way we would understand what was kind of below the submarines. We could figure out places to go, easiest routes to get from here to Europe, should we have to fight underwater again. But what Harry Hess found was this gigantic, almost scar-looking crust in between North America and Europe. It's almost like a dividing line that was later, when the rest of the ocean floor was mapped, we could see this huge dividing line, and we call this the mid-ocean ridge. The mid-ocean ridge is where we have this idea kind of separating from continental drift, that the continents didn't float around like rafts on the ocean that way, but the continents as we see them today are attached to the earth. It's just that water covers the surface that we can't see. And so this mid-ocean ridge could possibly be a place where we can have this continental movement happening. The rift valleys were the in between the mountains of the mid-ocean ridge. And these rift valleys, underneath them, we notice that we have magma, liquid earth, coming up from the surface. And when that happens, when magma from inside the earth is forced upward, the crust will crack. It's an enormous amount of pressure, and it will actually be enough force to move pieces of the crust apart. So we go from continental drift to this idea of sea floor spreading. We can take a look at some evidence to kind of support this idea of continental movement by seafloor spreading. We can take continental rocks and seafloor rocks and radioactively date them. We know that continental rocks are much, much older than seafloor rocks. So as the crust moves away from that mid-ocean ridge, it carries everything with it, sediments, fossils if there are any. So the further away from the mid-ocean ridge those sediments are, the older the rock or sediment is. We also took a look at the magnetic polarity of rocks along the seafloor. As magma crystals form, as we go from liquid earth to solid earth, the magnetic materials in the magma take on the polarity of earth at the time they cool. And what we realized was, in distances from the mid-ocean ridge, that there were actually blocks of rock that had reversed polarity, and meaning that at some points in Earth's history, the magnetic North Pole was the magnetic South Pole, and vice versa, and in equal distances away from this mid-ocean ridge. We finally kind of develop from continental drift to seafloor spreading to this idea of plate tectonics. The lithosphere, litho comes from the Latin word meaning rock. Lithosphere is the rigid outer layers of Earth's surface. It's the crust. There are 12 main lithospheric plates. There's many, many other small ones, but the interactions between those plates cause a lot of our Earth phenomenon, earthquakes and volcanoes, etc. So here's kind of a visual of all of the different types of plates. And as you can see, the reason why this continental drift theory kind of puzzle piece idea came into place is because it's not the continents themselves that are fitting together like puzzle pieces, but it's the actual lithospheric plates that fit together like puzzle pieces. Different types of boundaries where all of these lithospheric plates are touching each other. We can have a couple of different interactions. A divergent boundary is when two plates move apart from each other. So an example of that would be the mid-ocean ridge and rift valleys. So divergent means moving away. A convergent boundary, that's where two plates are going to collide and push into one another. An example of that is the Mariana Trench, which is in the Pacific Ocean. This is the deepest part of the Earth's surface. So we have one plate subducting or sinking under another. Transform boundaries. Some plates aren't pulling apart or jamming into each other. Some of them are kind of scraping along side by side, and that's a transform boundary. A great example of that is the famous San Andreas Fault in California. Part of California is on the Pacific Plate, and the rest of the United States and part of California is on the North American Plate. And that constant grinding side by side causes many earthquakes along that area. So if continental drift morphs into seafloor spreading, which morphs into plate tectonics, so then how do these whole entire lithospheric plates, chunks of Earth's crust, move around? Well, thermal energy is going to be what drives the plates. The convection, or the circular motion of molten material inside the Earth, is that driving force for tectonic plate motion. So inside the Earth, we have portions that are liquid. And as things heat up, heat rises. And so very hot magma rises up to the surface. And as it does so, it starts to cool off. And it's almost like a pulling device. It's like a conveyor belt with rollers. And as the molten material circles around, it pulls or pushes or puts side by side all of these plate interactions. And that's how the lithospheric plates move around. This has been Physical Science 2, Chapter 12, Part 1 on Earth's internal processes.